Going back as far as 2012 when Peercoin released the first ever proof-of-stake blockchain, a debate has been raging amongst the community as to which is better, proof of work or proof of stake. So stick around and let's talk about it. Hey guys, I'm Sprague, and depending on which coins you follow, you'll probably find the community of those coins will be very adamant that the consensus implementation chosen by that coin is the correct one. The problem is though that it's actually kind of hard to find a logical breakdown of the two protocols that isn't heavily subjected to bias. So unfortunately, while I can't categorically say which one is better than the other, given that there's just too many factors that go into choosing one of these protocols, I can hopefully shed some light on what the differences between the two are and clear up any misinformation that might be being spread by maximalists. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want to give a basic explanation of the two different protocols, just before we get into the heavy in-depth stuff. This will just kind of act as a foreword so that everything's easier to understand later on. Also, I won't be going into specific proof-of-stake implementations like nPoS, dPoS, etc. We're just going to be talking about the underlying protocol proof of stake. For proof of work, every block on the chain contains a nonce, and for the Brits in my audience, it does not mean what you think it means. Nonce stands for number only used once and is the result of the cryptographic hash the miners are trying to solve. When this number is found by a miner, they are rewarded for their effort, and then that block is added to the chain. In proof of stake, the core idea is that instead of using computing power, it's a financial incentive that is used to disincentivize misbehaving by directly reducing the validator's token supply if they misbehave. The details vary implementation to implementation, but the broad stroke says the protocol will choose one of these validators and they will then be chosen to mint the next block. Both these protocols aim to achieve the same goal, which is to ensure that no one party has consistent and majority control over the network. But the way they go about it is very different. Despite being made famous by Bitcoin, proof of work actually predates Bitcoin by 16 years. First being invented as a way to protect networks against DDoS attacks and network spam by making the requester do some form of work before they could access the resource they were requesting. However, it was in 1999 that the term proof of work was first coined. But really, the popularity of proof of work only really came about because of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, where its main application was in achieving consensus. This is done by creating a race condition between the people who are pledging their computational power to the protocol, with the amount of computational power that they are pledging to the proof of work algorithm being directly proportional to the chances that they will be the next minter. So while proof of work was actually originally designed for a completely different thing that ended up being used for cryptocurrencies, proof of stake on the other hand was actually designed with cryptocurrencies in mind, and was designed purely just to solve the inefficiencies in proof of work. This inefficiency being energy used, and the fact that as the chain grows and more participants join the network, this energy usage will grow and grow exponentially. So despite the fact that various implementations of proof of stake bill themselves as being faster or more efficient than proof of work, this actually isn't the reason that the protocol exists in the first place. It is purely just there to try and solve the energy consumption problem with proof of work. Where proof of work has the participants pledge their computing power to show their allegiance and trustworthiness to the chain, proof of stake instead has them offer direct financial involvement in the chain. Boiled down to their simplest form, these two protocols do exactly the same thing. They force a participant to prove that they will not misbehave. Proof of work does this by making the user spend money in the form of energy, and proof of stake does this by making the participant put their money directly at risk. When you think about either implementation, they favor the people that want to profit the most from the network, and attacking the network actively harms the ability to make profit, because in the long run, you're devaluing the thing that you've spent money trying to gain. This means that the people most likely to be chosen as validators on either protocol are the people who've spent the most money proving their trustworthiness. But trustworthiness is a difficult thing, and these protocols are actually designed to completely remove the need for trust. For example, in proof of work, only those dedicated to the network itself will actually purchase the hardware required to get the rewards from mining blocks. But due to the fact that this is profitable, there will be more and more competition, meaning that the chances that one party will have any major control over the network is made infinitesimally small. Similarly, in proof of stake, only those willing to pledge larger and larger amounts of their tokens to be a validator will ever be chosen to validate a block. This means that the most dangerous type of attack is actually negated by either protocol implementation, and that is the Sybil attack. Sybil attacks aren't unique to crypto, and in fact there's a chance that you in your life so far have probably actually seen the effects of one of these without even realizing it. Sybil attacks are where a participant creates enough alter egos for themselves that they can then influence control over the network. Take for example Google Maps. If I created enough accounts and on all of those accounts reported a small street as being closed, there's a chance that Google might see all of these reports coming from seemingly different people and mark that street as closed, despite the fact it's actually open and fine. This obviously has ramifications, but in this instance, there's no one directly being monetarily harmed. However, in something like cryptocurrencies, an undetected party performing a Sybil attack on, say, Bitcoin could end the chain forever once it's found out, because in reality, they could do whatever they wanted to the chain. The whole point of a Sybil attack is to try and spread misinformation among the network while being completely undetected. So looking at proof of work first, the way that proof of work actually manages to negate this is because all of the miners need to pledge their computing power to solving the next block. This means that if they were to try and split up all of their computing power among many nodes to try and stay anonymous, they would be diluting their chance of ever actually being a block validator. The only way to get around this would be to create a mining pool and put all of their hash rate together. But this would then be noticed by the network as people would start to take notice of one massive mining pool. This would go against the entire point of the Sybil attack, because the network would then know that this party is trying to gain control. The story is similar in proof of stake, where a party would have to spread their staked amount across multiple validator nodes, therefore diluting the chance that any node would actually get chosen as a validator. Again, the only option would be pooling or delegation, which reveals them to the network. If they were to pool their mining hash rate or delegate their staked amount into a single entity that has control over the network, this is a 51% attack. In a 51% attack, the attacker has full control over block production, which obviously, as you can imagine, has some pretty bad ramifications. These 51% attacks are negated, however, by the fact that anyone can join and participate in these networks. So the cost of trying to perform one of these attacks is actually immense, but we'll cover that a bit more later. One belief that people hold about proof of work is that you are spending energy to create coins, and that because proof of stake doesn't require any energy consumption, that those coins are somehow coming out of nowhere. The problem is that this is kind of a fundamental misunderstanding of what these protocols actually are and do. The entire point of these protocols isn't to determine the distribution of these coins. Satoshi could have just as easily minted all of the bitcoins in existence in the Genesis block and then distributed them, and had the miners instead just perform consensus based on the transaction fees. The thing is that proof of stake does have to mint enough coins in their Genesis to get the staking kickstarted, but proof of work could do the exact same thing. It's just a difference in how the coins are distributed, and that's a choice made by the programmer, not by the protocol. The actual reason these protocols exist is to do one thing: to deter and stop any attacker from taking advantage of the network. And they both do this incredibly effectively by ensuring one thing: attacking the network needs to have enough of a cost to deter any bad actors from even attempting to do so. Proof of work is easier to understand, and I think this is why most people gravitate towards believing that it is in some way more secure. The way that attacking proof of work would work is that first you need to create your own fork, because you're now going against what the rest of the network believes is true, and then mine on your own fork until you can overtake the main fork and have your version of events believed as the truth. This means the cost to attack a proof of work network is twofold. Firstly, you need to have enough hash rate to overtake the network hash. This is because if you don't have more hash rate than the rest of the network combined, your fork will never catch up with the main one. And secondly, you need to pay the energy consumption for every single block that you create in your own fork. This means that if, say, there's 10 blocks difference between your fork and the main fork, you are paying the sole energy consumption for all 10 of those blocks. This does, however, mean though that if the network hash rate does not change, then once you have purchased the computing power required to overtake the network, the only ongoing cost is actually the energy cost to produce the next block. In proof of stake, however, the only cost is actually achieving 51% of the staked token supply. This would give them full control over the network. However, every time they perform a malicious attack or misbehave, other validators will report their actions and their token supply will be reduced. Because in proof of stake protocols, the validators are designed to be suspicious of every other validator. It means that if one validator does something that the rest of the network can confirm is a bad action, then they will report it to the protocol. The protocol then, on confirming these reports, will slash the stake of the bad actor. This means that the ongoing cost of a 51% attack is repeatedly buying enough tokens each time you want to perform something malicious like a double spend. But if you actually look up confirmed 51% attacks, you'll find they've only actually ever been carried out on smaller proof of work chains. And this is because in proof of stake, unlike just being able to buy a bunch of graphics cards to be able to attack a smaller chain, you need to own 51% of the staked token supply. So using Sol as an example, I would need to own 251 million Sol to perform a 51% attack on the network. This would mean that I would be spending $34 billion just to achieve the tokens to actually attack the network. But then the big problem is that in attacking the network, I then devalue the network. So those 251 million Sol that I've just purchased for 34 billion might now only be worth a tenth of that, meaning that there's almost no point in me ever trying to attack that chain, even if I had the money to buy those tokens in the first place. This means from an attack cost perspective, there's actually very little difference between proof of work or proof of stake. However, I think the thing that a lot of people overlook is the fact that in proof of work, hardware is not usually specific to a single chain, apart from chains that are dominated by ASICs, like Bitcoin. The thing is that with smaller chains, you could buy the hardware required to overtake the hash rate of one small chain, and once you've attacked it, move on to the next one, because you still have value in the hardware that you bought. In proof of stake, however, to perform the attack, you need to actively invest in the chain that you are attacking, which means that once you perform the attack, you're devaluing your initial investment to zero, which means, okay, you might manage to perform an attack on a single chain. That doesn't mean that you're then going to actually be able to carry over anything from that attack to the next one, or you might even lose money on the fact that the money that you gained by attacking the network would be lower than the money you lose buying those tokens in the first place. But moving on to decentralization, this actually is one aspect that does differ quite a lot between the two protocols. For proof of work, anyone can get involved in the network. All they have to do is download the mining software and run it on their PC, and they're now a validator on the network. This means the only bar of entry for actually participating in consensus on proof of work is just having enough processing power to actually make a meaningful impact. However, the problem is that there's nothing in the proof of work protocol that actually enforces decentralization. This means that there is nothing stopping people pulling together into a single entity. Taking Bitcoin, for example, this has led to 50% of all blocks ever being validated by just 10 mining pools. This means that with a coordinated attack between those 10 mining pools, they could, in theory, overthrow the Bitcoin network. Proof of stake, on the other hand, is entirely dependent on the distribution of its token, because to actually participate in the network, you first need to own the coin. This means that it's not nearly as easy as just downloading the miner software. You actually need to find someone who's selling the token first. I speculate that Bitcoin would not be where it is now if first Satoshi had to convince other people to buy some Bitcoin just so they could participate in the network first. However, despite being not as easy to get started as proof of work, the proof of stake protocol can enforce decentralization, which means depending on the implementation, no one entity could end up with too much voting power. In both networks, however, there is a problem with control being given to only those who already have money. For example, in proof of work, only those with the money to buy expensive ASICs or graphics cards will actually be able to earn a solid return from the network. This means the companies that have a lot of money to throw at the chain can consolidate all of their mining power to make the best return, but also be chosen as a validator far more often than the little guy. This does mean that despite the fact that initially proof of work was marketed as being able to have anyone participate in the network, this isn't necessarily true, with big companies really starting to monopolize the hash rate. And for proof of stake, the requirement of distribution means that those that manage to get in early can buy a lot more tokens for a far cheaper price, meaning they have more voting power. Then, as the chain grows and the token price increases, the likelihood that other people will actually be able to get in and be able to buy enough tokens to make a meaningful impact decreases. For example, when Ethereum transitions to ETH 2.0 and becomes proof of stake, it will require 32 ETH to be able to stake on it. This means that of the 700,000 active ETH wallets currently being used, only 1/7 of these will actually have enough Ethereum to stake on the new network. And this bar of entry will only get higher and higher as the price of Ethereum rises. So whereas proof of work has a more decentralized approach to distribution, the long-term prospects of a proof of work chain actually lend itself more to mining centralization. And with proof of stake, the initial token distribution means that the actual start of the chain is far, far less decentralized. If the protocol is implemented correctly, it could grow to be far more decentralized further down the line. And just to touch on proof of stake's adoption, With proof of work, it's actually far easier to get started on the chain, because most proof of work chains actually use the same hashing algorithms. This means that you can download a miner, point it at the address required to mine the new coin, and away you go, you can start mining. The problem with proof of stake is that before a coin gets listed on a major exchange, it is incredibly hard to actually get hold of, with most proof of stake coins being sold off in initial coin offerings to venture capital companies. This means that to get in at a point when you can actually buy enough coins to make a difference, chances are you need to already have a large amount of money or influence with the company who've started that coin. This means that proof of stake coins cannot have a grassroots launch like Bitcoin did. Hopefully, if you were adamantly on one side or the other of this debate, this video has shed a little bit of light into how the protocols actually manage to retain fairly even and why you can't actually say one is better than the other. However, the one thing I will say is a major benefit to proof of work over proof of stake, and probably the only thing that you can categorically say is better, is the implementation. Implementing a proof of work chain is incredibly simple. You just pick a hashing algorithm and away you go. With proof of stake, on the other hand, there is so many factors that have to go into designing a proof of stake chain to make sure that you're not just opening up security holes elsewhere. For example, implementing a proof of stake chain where anyone can be a validator means that as the network grows in size, so too does the amount of time needed to reach consensus, because now there is far more nodes that have a say in what blocks are actually being minted. Solving this, you could use block leaders, but now you've introduced a central point of failure where a list of block leaders could be the target of DDoS attacks. And then if you use nPoS or dPoS and you haven't enforced some sort of decentralization directly into the protocol, this could lead to a single validator having too much voting power delegated to them. But the thing is, these aren't things that are actually wrong with proof of stake itself. They are just things that are problems with the implementation. This is why I say when you boil the two down to purely what the protocol does, they are almost equal. They have their benefits, they have their cons. The thing is that proof of work has the one major selling point that it's much easier to create a secure chain without the need for over-engineering. Proof of stake, on the other hand, requires a far greater team of people to actually develop, far more investor funding and technical know-how to actually be able to do so securely. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave me a like and a comment down below. If you disagreed with anything I said in this video, or if I got anything wrong, again, leave it down below. If you genuinely enjoy my content, please consider subscribing. Thanks, bye.